So, one of the saddest things I've ever encountered is a man who allowed all of his dreams to die. Not because he's lazy, not because he's not gifted, and definitely not because God didn't call him to something great. But somewhere along the way, the opposition just wore him down. And today, I want to talk about how to keep all that from happening to you. And if you're honest enough to admit that some of your dreams have already died, we're also going to talk about how to get them back. What's up, fam? This is Larry LC Crawford, and welcome back to Limitless. Now, every man I know has at least one area in his life he wants to be successful in right now. It could be his career, his marriage, his calling, maybe leadership at work, or his faith walk. But what if one of the things that's stopping many of us from being successful isn't lack of effort or opportunity, or not even lack of ability? What if it's opposition that you weren't prepared for? So I was talking with my son AJ the other morning, and we were talking about some big moments in life. I mean, he's 14 and he's already had one. I'm 50 and I've had quite a few. And as we talked, I started thinking about the other men I know, the different stories in their lives. But every one of them had these things in common. See, right before the breakthrough, there was intense opposition, pressure, resistance, fear, risky situations. And then, right after the tension, a decision. Do you ever remember watching those videos of a spaceship launching and going into outer space? See, we all love the image of the spaceship just out there floating freely in space, ground controlled a Major Tom, quiet, weightless, and just free. That's the part we like. That's the part we celebrate. But nobody talks about what happens before that moment. Because before freedom, there's gravity. There's something that's pulling you down. You know what I'm talking about. And gravity doesn't care about how inspired you are. It doesn't care what you want. It just keeps pulling. And I'm going to tell you, brothers, the only way to escape gravity is not by talking to it. You just flat out have to overcome it. And here is where men give up. See, overcoming gravity is extremely difficult. It requires a massive output of energy, intense focus, sustained effort, and the willingness to endure pressure for a sustained period of time. And that's hard because most of us as men, we're already tired. And so when opposition comes up, our fatigue causes us to stop pushing, and we retreat from the dream that was on the line. We don't do this like real loudly and just say, I quit. No, it's one of those things that happens quietly. We just kind of settle in and allow gravity to do its work. That freedom, that adventure, that sense of accomplishment from overcoming gets pushed away for another day. And that's a rough deal. Now, hear me when I say this, because I think this is going to help a few people. See, before you get to wear your spacesuit, first, you got to decide to put on your work boots. And this is where most men opt out, because work boots mean sweat, strain, sacrifice, and uncertainty. Now, when I say opt out, most men don't kill the dream overnight. They don't go and grab their dream by the throat and choke it or set it on fire. Most of us don't do that. We just let the dream starve. We learn to live with the tension instead of overcoming it. We learn to manage the disappointment instead of addressing the things that cause it. And we normalize the frustration that we've been feeling from our limited life. And over time, the dream just dies. And this is why men who are unfulfilled aren't usually extremely angry. They're too exhausted to be. Now, scripture is kind enough to name this condition for us. The book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 12 says this. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Now, notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say hope denied. It just says hope deferred. In other words, hope delayed, hope postponed, hope put on hold. See, men don't break because their dream was impossible. Men break because the opposition delays the dream long enough for the heart to feel like it can't carry on anymore. But then the verse continues and it says, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. See, the moment we begin to see growth, like a blossom opening or a bud forming on a tree, the progress restores life. We see movement, and that revives our hearts. And this is what you need to understand. See, opposition is the resistance to movement. Opposition isn't the evidence that you're doing something wrong. And what we have to learn to do is stop misinterpreting opposition as something that it isn't, or something that is more powerful than it is. But as men, most of us were expected to know how to handle opposition, but we weren't taught to handle opposition. See, opposition has to be interpreted correctly. It has to be endured correctly. And it has to be responded to correctly. But when we don't know how to do those three things as it relates to opposition, we start making assumptions. We assume, maybe I just missed God, or maybe I'm not built for this. Maybe this wasn't meant for me. Or the worst one, because I'm 50 years old, maybe it's too late. So opposition in itself doesn't destroy men. Misunderstood opposition destroys men. And opposition, not managed well, slowly pulls you and your dream back to the ground. And so for a second, I want to talk about how opposition kills dreams. I want to go back to that conversation with my son in the car. One of the things I told him was that each of these men that had big moments had a moment of tension or frustration before it, but they made a decision to do something radical to break free from the thing that was holding them down. And I looked at this 14-year-old boy and I said, son, don't you ever trade your jetpack for anything. So let's talk about how opposition actually kills dreams. It typically comes dressed in 5 ways. First way is this. It comes looking like delay without clarity. See, when men don't know why they're waiting or why things are put on hold, hope begins to just erode away. It just fades, and all of a sudden, a man that's not even thinking about the dreams he's had. He's not even considering pursuit of the dreams that he once held dear. Second way that opposition appears is in pressure without purpose. I call it stress for no reason. See, we can handle stress. We were built by God to be able to handle stress, but too much stress without meaning just becomes exhaustion. And that drains our stamina. And again, we don't pursue our dreams. Number 3, opposition comes looking like resistance without strategy. Now, what does that mean? Listen to me. Every single time you have a dream, there's going to come some type of opposing force, whether it's in the form of a personality or a circumstance or a thought process. But opposition of this type requires navigation, not avoidance. In other words, this type of resistance, we have to have a plan for. And without that plan, we stay on the ground. Here's another one. Isolation. You'll never become your best self all by yourself. When men have a dream, men need a team. That's all it is to it. Because when we hit walls that we can't overcome, men tend to retreat inward instead of recruiting support. Keeps you on the ground. And last but not least, one of the things that'll drain your jetpack is confusing rest with retreat. See, there's a difference between laying down to rest and laying down to quit, between taking time to recover or using time to retreat. All of these things are ways that opposition invades your life and keeps your dreams on the ground. But the good news is there's a way to turn your jetpack back on. In fact, if your jetpack feels empty, hear me clearly. 1, you're not broken. 2, you're not weak. And 3, you're not disqualified. You've just been fighting opposition without a plan. And that's what this entire series is going to be about. We're going to be talking about opposition and overcoming it, because here's the truth that most men don't want to face. While we don't go looking for enemies, or we shouldn't, there are going to be moments in life where another person, another system, or another force is going to decide that you are the enemy. It's going to take an adversarial stance against you. In other words, it's you against them. And if you don't understand the opposition types and the strategy on how to manage opposition of different shapes and sizes, you're going to bring a knife to a gunfight. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to break down the different types of opposition, how to recognize them early, how to respond without becoming bitter. So you don't need a new dream. You just need some clarity about the resistance to your dream, because dreams don't die from impossibility. Dreams die when we don't properly address the opposition. So before you get your spacesuit, gotta grab your work boots. And the brothers that keep lacing them up eventually leave the ground. This is LC. I'll talk to you next time. Stay limitless. Peace.